When I opened the door, I didn't expect to see him. Jack stood on the porch like he had every right to be there. One hand rested on the handle of a roller suitcase. 8 more were lined up behind him, perfectly aligned on the concrete like soldiers. Nancy stood a step behind, already scanning the porch trim, her mouth pressed into the shape of approval withheld. "You've got way too much space," Jack said, stepping past me. I didn't move aside. He walked around me anyway, like we'd seen each other last week, not 10 years ago. Nancy followed, a soft clack of heels on hardwood. She smiled without warmth. Lovely floors. No apologies, no mention of my mother's funeral, no curiosity about how I'd survived after being cut off by the family, just bags, entitlement, and eyes that read the layout of the house like a deed. Jack turned slowly in the foyer, nodding as if he were inspecting a listing. "So this is what you've done with it." I didn't answer. Silence is a kind of line. They crossed it anyway. Nancy walked into the living room and placed her purse on the piano bench. She ran one hand along the back of the couch, as if testing for quality. "We were hoping the guest rooms are still upstairs?" she asked. Not really a question. Jack opened a suitcase. I watched the zipper slide. 10 years ago, after my mother's passing, I enlisted. Jack had driven me to the recruiter's office, told me it was brave. 2 weeks later, he married Nancy. Calls went unanswered. Letters were returned unopened. When I completed basic, I sent a photo. It came back folded, no note inside. The final message was brief. I still remember every word. "Don't contact us anymore. This is Nancy's decision, and I agree with her." That was the last thing I heard, until now. They didn't ask to stay. They didn't explain why they had 9 suitcases. They didn't seem surprised the house was clean, furnished, intact. They didn't ask how I got here. Jack moved to the window, parted the curtain with 2 fingers, and looked out at the quiet street like he was gauging curb appeal. "Better neighborhood than I thought," he said. Nancy was already taking mental inventory. Her eyes moved across the framed certificates in the hallway. Service commendations, rank promotions, a few photographs of my last command. She didn't ask about them. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. I knew that tone. I'd seen it in debriefs. It was the look of someone mapping their next position. They'd left their car running. I watched the exhaust rise in the cold air. Washington in November always smelled faintly of rain and wood smoke. The porch was still damp from the morning. Jack finally glanced back at me. "We're staying a little while. We thought it was time to reconnect." Not sorry, not unsure, just entitled. "We'll bring the rest in after we rest a bit," Nancy added. "It's been a long drive." I said nothing. Jack stepped into the dining room. "How many square feet is this place again?" His tone was casual, but the question wasn't. He already knew. He'd helped my mother buy the house 15 years ago. He'd written the check for the down payment after my father's estate finally cleared. At the time, he called it a family favor. After the funeral, he mentioned it again, quieter that time. He'd been keeping tabs. "It's well laid out," Nancy said. "Open, but not too exposed." She ran her hand along the dining table. Not mine, my mother's. Refinished once, preserved carefully. She tapped a nail on the oak surface. "Solid," she said. They had driven across 3 states to stand in my hallway, comment on my furniture, and unload their belongings like the past hadn't happened. Nancy wore a pale gray coat, wool, double-breasted, expensive, a thin scarf tied precisely at her throat. Jack looked older, more than 10 years older, but his voice still held that practiced smoothness, the kind that passed for charm at golf tournaments and retirement luncheons. Nancy was harder to read. She always had been. She didn't talk too much. She didn't need to. She specialized in implication. "I love what you've done with the walls," she said, walking through the kitchen. "All this clean space. It's so flexible." Flexible. Another word that wasn't just about paint. I stood near the stairs, letting them roam, letting them settle, letting them underestimate. They weren't here for family. They were here because they thought something was vulnerable, available, unclaimed. "I can take the upstairs suite," Nancy called, "unless you'd rather we use the one near the back." She already had her coat off. She was folding it over the arm of a chair like she lived here. Jack rubbed his jaw and turned toward me. "We should have come sooner," he said, "but we figured now was the right time." He said it like it was obvious, like the last 10 years were a scheduling issue. Nancy opened a cabinet, closed it again, and smiled faintly. "Good storage." The silence lengthened. I let it. Jack stood there holding his coffee mug like a prop, waiting for something. A nod, a smile, permission. I didn't give it. "I imagine you've kept everything in your name?" Nancy asked, still looking at the cabinetry. "Deeds, titles, the usual things." I didn't answer. She nodded slightly, as if I had. Jack shifted his weight. "We should get settled." There was no request, no invitation, no pretense of gratitude. I stayed still. There was a time when I would have asked why, a time when I would have tried to make sense of it. That time passed years ago. People like Nancy don't come back unless they've measured what they want. People like Jack don't apologize unless they're cornered, and even then, they call it reconciliation. Jack reached for his second suitcase. "You've done well," he said. "Looks like everything turned out fine after all." I watched the line of luggage. I watched the way Nancy placed her keys on the entryway table, not stacked, but spread, like they were already hers. I watched the way Jack looked around without once saying my name. Outside, the wind picked up. The car engine cut. Nancy's phone buzzed on the counter, screen flashing briefly. She didn't check it. "Should we expect groceries or—" She left the question open, like a loop waiting for me to close it. I didn't. She looked at Jack. Jack looked at me. For a brief second, something passed across his face. Something too soft to be guilt, too shallow to be regret. But he didn't speak. I turned and walked to the kitchen. Not away, not to hide, just to give them space to decide what they thought was happening. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and turned the burner. The house was quiet enough to hear the click of the igniter. Nancy stood near the window now. She wasn't looking out. She was looking at the frame, measuring, estimating value. Jack stretched his back. He looked tired, not from the drive, from years of pretending the past had no weight. The tea whistled. I poured one mug, just one. No one spoke again. Some families fall apart loudly. Slam doors, broken plates, police on the lawn. Ours ended with a short email and years of silence. But it didn't stay buried. They were back now, and I wasn't 17 anymore. I didn't tell them they could stay. I also didn't tell them to leave. That's the part people forget. Silence isn't permission. It's strategy. By morning, Nancy had unpacked. Her suitcases were stacked like stairs in the corner of the guest room, half open, contents arranged in tidy grids across the bed. Silk blouses, a jewelry roll, a leather folder thick with labeled tabs. I noticed the label that said property. She made coffee like it was her house. She asked where I kept the brown sugar, then opened the wrong cabinet on purpose. "You should really reorganize," she said. "Makes things easier to manage." Jack wandered through the backyard with a rake he hadn't asked for. He poked at leaves, then came back inside and asked if the furnace had been serviced this year. "You've got to stay ahead of these things," he said, standing in the hall where my mother used to hang wreaths. Neither of them mentioned Thanksgiving. It was less than a week away. Nancy sat at the dining table that afternoon with a pad of graph paper. She drew rectangles, house dimensions, furniture placement. She tapped her pen lightly against the wood between calculations. "Have you ever considered refinishing the floors?" she asked. "They're good quality, but a little dated." I didn't answer. She kept drawing. By the second day, she started asking questions with weight behind them. "Are the property taxes high here? Did your mother leave a will, or was it just a trust? Have you refinanced since you left the military?" Each one came softly, framed as casual, but none of them were small talk. Nancy didn't believe in small talk. She believed in leverage. I watched her movements, how she touched things, what she avoided. She never entered the office. She never sat at my mother's piano, but she opened every other drawer in the kitchen under the pretense of looking for coasters. Jack trailed behind her most of the time, quiet, shuffling, offering commentary without direction. "She's just better with these things," he said once, gesturing vaguely as Nancy examined a water bill like it was a contract. They hadn't come to reconnect. They hadn't come to apologize. They came to take inventory. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I listened. That night, I opened a folder of my own, not in the kitchen, not in the living room, but behind a door Nancy hadn't touched. I reviewed documents, deeds, titles, trust updates. I ran backups. I scanned for changes. I made quiet calls to my attorney, to the estate planner I'd hired 3 years ago. Not because I needed to, because I knew they'd try. The third morning, Nancy asked if I'd ever had the place appraised recently. You know, just for clarity, it's always good to know the value of what you're working with. I didn't answer. She smiled. Of course. Just a thought. Jack didn't meet my eyes at breakfast. He stirred his coffee 5 times, took 1 sip, left the rest. Later, Nancy found me in the garage. I was wiping down an old workbench. She tilted her head. "It's so modest, considering what you've built." I looked at her. Not long, just long enough. "You've done well," she said. "No one's denying that. But the real test is legacy. What you leave behind, what you share." Her voice didn't change. That's how I knew it was rehearsed. "You've got a lot of assets tied up in this house," she added, "and no dependents. It makes sense to think practically." I didn't speak. I just returned the rag to the hook. She waited. I let her. That night, I logged into my surveillance system and adjusted the settings. I enabled motion capture inside the house, silent, discreet. I backed up footage to a secure drive. I reviewed entry logs, the front door, the office, the safe. I filed a quiet report through a contact at the security firm I used for consultation. Just a review, just a timestamp. By the 5th day, Nancy's questions changed shape. "Do you have a power of attorney on file? It's something every responsible adult should arrange." Jack looked up at that one. He started to say something, then stopped. Nancy waited. I stood. I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and retrieved a bottle of water. I closed the door. I returned to the table. I drank. I didn't look at either of them. That was answer enough. The next morning, I left early. I went to the notary's office, signed 3 updated documents, and walked them straight to the courthouse drop box. I left no gaps, no delays. I returned home just before noon. Jack was in the backyard watering a flower bed that didn't need it. Nancy stood in the hallway holding my mother's photo. "She looked so young here," she said. I nodded. She placed the frame back on the shelf, 1 inch to the left. By evening, Jack had moved into the den. "Just to give Nancy more room," he said. He didn't meet my eyes. "We don't want to be a burden." I said nothing. Burden wasn't the word. Occupation was closer. That night, I locked the office door. Nancy noticed. She didn't comment until the next day. "I hope you're not feeling like you have to protect things from us. We're family." I looked at her. She smiled. Then she turned back to her graph paper. I went to the garage. I called a friend, a former systems analyst from my last base. I explained what was happening. I gave her the outline. I used no names. She said, "Do you want me to check for exposure?" I said yes. She ran a sweep. Nothing public yet. No inquiries. No unusual access. "But," she said, "I'd recommend tightening permissions. Now." I did. I changed every password. I reset security questions. I enabled 2-step verification on every financial account, utility, insurance login. I updated all legal documentation with new contact instructions. I uploaded everything to an encrypted vault and disconnected the old device. That evening, Nancy mentioned home ownership transfer procedures over dinner. "Just hypothetically," she said. Jack cleared his throat. "It's not about taking anything. It's about planning." I met his eyes. He looked away. When the plates were cleared, I remained at the table. They moved to the living room. I heard the soft murmur of Nancy's voice, the lower tone Jack used when he thought he was being firm. I made tea. I reviewed my list. Nancy was consistent. She circled her goals, never lunging. She knew how to build pressure by wearing patience like virtue. Jack deferred to her in increments. He hadn't realized how far it had gone. Not yet. 2 nights later, she printed a list of asset consolidation questions. She left it on the table with a Post-it that said, "For discussion." I didn't touch it. I left it there. I let it speak. Jack avoided the kitchen that day. By now, I had documented everything. Photos, dates, recordings of conversations where questions crossed into implications, a timeline of who said what, when, and in what context. I archived it all in case. People assume confrontation is loud, but in systems, it's just data. On the 8th day, a package arrived addressed to Jack. Inside, legal templates, transfer of ownership, durable power of attorney, estate simplification tools. He opened it quietly in the den. Nancy waited until I stepped outside to rake leaves. Then she followed. "You should really consider letting someone help you with all this," she said. I looked at her. "I've got it covered." She smiled. "Of course, but it's always good to delegate." Silence. Wind moved through the trees. A car passed in the distance. I adjusted the rake in my hands. I looked at the pile I'd gathered. "I've built systems that keep people alive," I said. Nancy didn't move. "We just want to make sure you're supported." I didn't answer. She waited 1 second longer, then turned and walked back inside. That night, I backed up every camera angle, every entry log, every financial record. I printed and sealed a full report with timestamps and encrypted metadata, handed it to my attorney, and instructed him to act if I disappeared, fell ill, or signed anything out of pattern. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you expecting trouble?" I said. "No, I'm documenting behavior." He nodded once. "Smart." By now, Jack had stopped asking questions. He watched me move through the house like I'd changed languages. Nancy moved slower. She asked fewer things. She still checked the locks each night, but not to keep people out, to see what stayed protected. Nancy never asked for permission to plan. She simply acted as if it had already been granted. The next invitation came on embossed paper, hand-delivered. A family event in Portland. Not a reunion, not a wedding, something vague but dressed up. A private gathering for extended family, long-estranged cousins, former associates from Jack's old network. "It would mean a lot if you came," he said. "We're trying to build bridges." Nancy added, "And it would look good, having you there." I didn't ask who it would look good for. Jack rented a private jet, not because it was necessary, but because it made him feel important. He booked it for 6, but there were only 3 names on the manifest: his, Nancy's, and mine. When we arrived at the hangar, Nancy carried her bag herself, but handed me Jack's like it was understood. I didn't take it. The crew recognized me first. One of the ground handlers straightened when he saw my ID. Another nodded, subtle but sharp. Inside, the co-pilot paused when he checked the list. "You're her?" he asked, quiet. I gave him one nod. The plane was small but polished. Cream leather seats, navy trim, all the expected details. Nancy took the front row, of course. Jack followed, placing himself beside her, already fiddling with the in-flight monitor. "Your back row," he said, waving a hand behind him. "That bag's a bit of an eyesore." I didn't respond. I placed my bag carefully in the overhead, sat down, buckled in. As the door sealed and the engine spun up, Nancy leaned across the aisle. "There's bottled water in the front compartment," she said, "but they might run out." Jack laughed. "She's used to rationing." Takeoff was clean. The air smoothed out early. I glanced once at the instruments. Just habit, just awareness. 30 minutes in, the pilot's voice crackled into the cabin. "Ma'am?" His tone shifted mid-sentence. "We've been notified of incoming escort status. Red protocol, no cause for concern." Jack looked up. "Escort?" I didn't move, didn't blink. Outside the left window, it appeared. A flash of metal, fast, deliberate, close. A fighter jet, F-16, tail mark clean, formation tight. It stayed just long enough to be seen, then rolled away into cloud. The cabin went still. Jack's mouth opened, then closed. Nancy looked at me, then at the cockpit, then back. She smiled tightly. "Is that normal?" I looked out the window. "No," I said. The pilot didn't explain further. He didn't need to. It was a courtesy, a quiet gesture from the Air Force. Not dramatic, not requested, just remembered. The rest of the flight passed in silence. When we landed, Jack barely looked at me. Nancy thanked the crew without meaning it. The pilot met my eye before we stepped onto the tarmac. He didn't speak, just offered the smallest nod. In Portland, the event was held at a rented estate. Stone facade, hedges trimmed to symmetry, gravel too white to be real. Inside, candles, cocktails, curated nostalgia. I recognized few faces. Most looked past me. Nancy floated. That was her skill. She didn't push. She glided. She found the oldest relatives first. She listened just enough, then steered. I watched her ease next to a cousin who once managed a vineyard, compliment his tie, mention probate court. Jack kept to the middle of the room, holding drinks, shaking hands, laughing a little too loudly at comments that weren't jokes. He kept introducing me like I was a detail he'd almost forgotten to mention. Our niece, Air Force, something with planes, very disciplined. Nancy smiled every time someone said, "You look nothing like them." It was true. They never touched me. The manipulation didn't need to be dramatic. It was quiet, threaded into the way Nancy set down her wine glass, the way Jack placed his hand briefly on someone's arm when they asked about the family estate. By the third hour, they had done what they came to do. The old story was back in rotation, that Kimberly was brilliant, but distant. That she had assets she didn't know how to manage, that she might want help. I didn't correct them. I walked outside. The courtyard was empty except for one man, 70s, clean suit, steel hair. He nodded. "Kimberly." I didn't recognize him. "I knew your mother," he said. "Long time ago. I'm sorry for your loss. She was exact." I nodded. "She was." "She'd hate this," he said, glancing back toward the hall. I didn't disagree. "You still fly?" "Yes." He gave a low whistle. "And they're trying to make you the problem." He looked at me, eyes clear. "Don't let them." Then he stepped back inside. I didn't follow. 2 days later, Nancy made her move. She called a meeting, said she wanted to clarify some legal paperwork, nothing dramatic. She invited Jack, 2 of my second cousins, and a family friend who once clerked for a probate judge. She printed out summaries of holdings, old trust documents, a draft letter to a property lawyer. Jack sat at the table. Nancy did most of the talking. "We're just reviewing what's best for everyone. Kimberly's in transition. She's been so generous, but it's time to simplify." She smiled like she meant it. The cousins nodded slowly. The clerk didn't speak. I waited until she was done. Then I asked one question. "Who drafted these?" Nancy blinked. "It's a template, a suggestion." I looked at the bottom of the page. The metadata was still visible in the PDF footer. Drafted by N. Birch at heritagesolutions.org, a financial extraction firm known for elder manipulation cases. I'd already flagged the address weeks ago. I picked up the packet, set it in the center of the table. "I'd like to show you all something." I stood, crossed the room, dimmed the lights. Then I played the first clip. Nancy in the kitchen, reading off account numbers into her phone. The next, her saying to Jack, "If we push now, she won't contest. She hates drama." The third, Jack signing a blank document, Nancy watching. "I'll fill it in later," she said. Each one, time-stamped. Each one recorded legally. Audio surveillance in my home with proper notification. I watched their faces change. Not anger, not denial, calculation. I spoke once. "I didn't destroy this family. I just refused to be used by it." Then I turned off the projector. No one spoke for a long time. The meeting ended early. 3 weeks later, Nancy's name appeared on a cease and desist order from my attorney. She didn't reply. Her email bounced back. Her number disconnected. She vanished the way manipulators do when exposure breaks their grip, not with shame, but efficiency. Jack stayed behind. He didn't speak much, didn't argue. One morning, he handed me an envelope with a single sentence inside. I left her. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't offer forgiveness. But I didn't close the door either. He moved into a small apartment, filed his own paperwork, showed up to his counseling sessions, forwarded any contact from Nancy to his lawyer. That mattered. It wasn't redemption, but it was distance. The house went quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just honest, the kind my mother kept. I didn't change the locks, but I changed everything else. The next family gathering I attended was in uniform. No announcements, no performance. Someone offered me a seat at the back table. I declined. I stood near the doors, near the exit, where space stayed open. That's the difference. People like Nancy arrange rooms to trap you. I rearranged mine to stay free. The letter came folded into thirds, cream paper, single line. I left her. Jack didn't call. He didn't ring the bell. He left the envelope on my porch, weighted under a rock from the garden bed. He'd written my name in careful block letters like it might get lost otherwise. I stood there a full minute before I picked it up. Inside, no apology, no explanation, just the sentence. It was more honest than anything he'd said in years. I waited 2 days before I replied. Not a letter, not a call. I left a printed list in his mailbox. Resources, next steps, housing information, legal referrals. At the bottom, I wrote, "We can talk, no assumptions." He texted back 2 hours later. Okay. That was how it started. We met at a neutral diner. Vinyl booths, burnt coffee, plastic plants. A place that didn't ask for performance. Jack looked older, not just in his face, in his spine. In the way he kept glancing over his shoulder like Nancy might still be 2 steps behind him. "She didn't take it well," he said. "Not that you'd be surprised." I said nothing. He stirred his coffee 3 times. Didn't drink it. She said I was ungrateful, said I owed her the life we built. I looked out the window, cloud cover low, rain beginning. "I didn't think she'd go that far," he added, "with the paperwork, the recordings. I thought she was just organized." I turned back. "She was deliberate." He nodded. Once. Slowly. That's the word. We didn't talk about the emails, the staged signatures, the inheritance rumors. He didn't ask how long I'd been collecting evidence. He didn't need to. "I should have stopped it," he said, earlier, before it reached you. "You didn't." His jaw shifted. "I know." The waitress came by, asked if we wanted food. He shook his head. I asked for tea. We waited in silence while she filled the mug. Jack pulled a folder from his coat, slid it across the table. "What's this?" "Everything I still had access to," he said. "Financials, communications, notes she left. You should have it." I didn't touch it. Not yet. "She's still trying," he said. "Not legally, but indirectly, through friends, through whispers." I took a sip of tea, let the silence stretch. "I told them I wasn't part of it anymore," he added. "I told them if they tried again, I'd testify." That was the moment something shifted. Not trust, but verification. I reached into my bag, pulled out a smaller envelope. No seal, just my handwriting. He opened it, read it slowly. A list of boundaries. Clear, calm, no warmth, No loopholes. If he wanted a relationship, any kind, it would be structured. He nodded. I can work with this. I finished my tea, paid the bill. As we stood, he paused. I didn't leave because I was brave, he said. I left because you showed me what prepared looks like. I didn't respond. I didn't soften. We walked out together, separate cars, no hug. That was 8 months ago. He found a studio apartment 5 blocks from the marina. Simple, clean. He started volunteering at the Veteran Center. Nothing dramatic, just logistics. He liked inventory, scheduling, things that made sense. He never asked to visit the house. That mattered. We met once a month. Public places, structured time. He never arrived late. He never brought up Nancy. After the 3rd meeting, he mentioned he'd started therapy. I didn't think I needed it, he said. Turns out not needing something is the first sign you probably do. He didn't wait for approval, just said it. That mattered too. Eventually, he stopped forwarding Nancy's messages to me. He forwarded them straight to his lawyer. The last one came in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside, a photo of the 3 of us at my graduation from basic. I was 17. He had his hand on my shoulder. Nancy's smile looked permanent, almost real. He burned it, sent me a copy of the receipt from his attorney's documentation file. I'm done with nostalgia, he said. I believed him. By spring, the house settled. No more whispered questions, no mail addressed to the estate, no third-hand inquiries from family friends. The attorney closed the last of the pending reviews. My systems were intact. My name was clean. My record spoke louder than any opinion. That's the part people underestimate. Paper holds, screenshots hold, metadata holds. Opinions don't. I repainted the guest room that summer, not to erase them, just to reclaim the space. I took down the temporary curtains Nancy had insisted were aesthetically neutral. I put the old quilt back on the bed, the one my mother made from scraps during her recovery, stitched by hand, uneven in places. I sat on the edge of that bed once, just once, not to reflect, just to remember that I still controlled the locks. Later, I replaced the front doorknob with a keypad, the kind that requires code and clearance. No more keys floating in other people's purses. Jack asked if I was planning to sell. No, I said. He nodded. Good. It suits you. He never asked what I planned to do next. He didn't need to. He'd stopped assuming he was entitled to the answer. The last time we met, he brought 2 documents. One, an updated power of attorney. All legal authority revoked from anyone except himself, with a clause for automatic third-party review. The second, a letter he planned to file with the bank, stating that any attempts to access my accounts in his name were unauthorized. He handed them to me with a pen. Already signed, he said. I just thought you should see them. I folded the documents, placed them in my bag. You don't need to trust me, he added. You just need proof. I get that now. I looked at him. There was no pleading in his face, no request for forgiveness, just a quiet kind of steadiness I hadn't seen since I was a child. We finished our meal. I walked to the car. He didn't follow. That was the last time I saw him. We still exchange brief emails, once a month. Logistics, updates, no emotion, just truth. That's enough. I didn't win because someone else lost. I won because I stayed ready, because I kept receipts, because when the pressure came, I didn't flinch. Nancy disappeared. No announcements, no apologies. She moved out of state according to a mutual cousin, bought a townhouse, changed her number, kept her last name. Jack didn't chase her. I didn't speak her name again. Some people leave a mess behind. Others leave silence. She left both. But the house stayed quiet. That mattered. It wasn't a battleground anymore. It wasn't a stage. It wasn't a set piece in someone else's story. It was mine. The office was still small. The walls were still the same dull blue. The desk still bore the scratch from my mother's ring. But everything inside it was indexed, encrypted, protected. People ask what strength looks like. They want something loud, Something cinematic. It looks like passwords that don't reset. It looks like folders labeled verified. It looks like silence you don't owe anyone. When I stood at the edge of the driveway that fall, watching the first leaves break from the trees, I didn't feel closure. I felt continuity. That was enough. I walked back inside, locked the door, checked the system one last time. Everything was where it belonged, including me. Maybe you've known someone like Nancy. Maybe you've been expected to stay quiet, stay useful, stay available. Maybe you've learned how much power lives in silence that's chosen, not imposed. If this story sat with you, I'd like to hear what stayed. And if you'd like to read more, you're welcome to stay connected. Quietly, steadily, no pressure.